He cried at the altar in front of 206 guests, but the mic he wore at our engagement party had already recorded what he really wanted. 3 days before my wedding, my videographer sent me a rough cut of our engagement party, and 41 minutes into it, over a shot of me laughing with my aunt about the cake tasting, I heard my fiancé's voice come through the audio saying, "Relax, 12 months? Tops. Then half the house is mine and I'm gone." He wasn't on screen. He was 2 floors down in the parking garage, wearing the microphone the videographer had clipped to his lapel and forgotten to turn off, telling another woman exactly how long he planned to stay married to me. I watched that clip 11 times that night. I know it was 11 because I counted, the way you count stairs in the dark. And then I did something that everyone in my family still argues about at holidays, and that I would do again tomorrow, twice, with a smile on my face. I did not cancel the wedding. I let all 206 guests come. I let him stand at the front of that room in the suit I helped pay for. And then, when the toast started and the screen came down for our welcome video, I stood up with a microphone in my hand and I said, "Before anybody says anything nice about us, I want you all to hear something first. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up, because the part that matters isn't the room going silent. The part that matters is how long I ignored the feeling in my stomach that had been telling me something was wrong for almost a year. My name is Nora. I was 28 that spring. I managed the front office at a veterinary clinic in a town outside Columbus. And I had exactly one thing in my life that felt like it was truly mine. A small brick house on Fairbanks Street with a cracked driveway and a kitchen window that looked out at a crabapple tree. My dad bought that house in 1998, and he died in it in 2019. And when the life insurance came through, I did the least glamorous thing a 25-year-old can do with a sum of money. I paid off what was left of the mortgage, replaced the roof, and kept my job. My mother thought I should travel. My sister Beth thought I should invest it. I wanted a door that nobody could take away from me, because I had spent my whole childhood watching my parents get letters from the bank and pretend they were coupons. I met Grant Merrick 18 months later at, of all places, a fundraiser for the clinic. He was there because his company sponsored a table, and he stayed 40 minutes after everyone else to help me break down chairs. That's a detail I told people constantly, back when I was still telling people good things about him. He stayed to break down chairs. He was 31. He was a regional sales manager for a medical device company, and he had that particular kind of confidence that isn't loud. He asked questions and remembered the answers. 3 weeks in, he knew that my dad had been a contractor, that I hated the smell of lilies, and that I got migraines when I skipped lunch, and he started putting a granola bar in my bag on the mornings he stayed over. I want to be honest about him, because it would be easier for me to tell you he was a cartoon. He wasn't. Grant was funny in a dry way that took people a minute to catch. He was genuinely good with my mother, who is not an easy woman to be good with. When my sister's car died in February, he drove 90 minutes in freezing rain to pick her up and never once mentioned it again. Not even later when he could have used it to make himself look generous. There were real things about him. That's what makes this kind of story so slow to see from the inside. Nobody gets fooled by a monster. You get fooled by somebody who is kind to you 70% of the time, and you decide the other 30 is stress. He moved into the Fairbanks house 8 months after we started dating. He paid me rent for exactly 2 months, and then we stopped talking about it the way couples do, and I told myself it was fine because he covered groceries and the internet and the trip to Charleston that August. He proposed in October in the kitchen on a Tuesday with no photographer and no drone and no sign, which I loved. He said he didn't want a moment that belonged to other people. He said he wanted a moment that belonged to us. I have replayed that sentence a lot since. There are 3 small things I need you to hold on to because they all come back later, and at the time, each of them looked like nothing. The first is his Uncle Ray. Ray had gotten ordained online to marry Grant's cousin 2 summers before, and Grant asked him to do our ceremony too. Except when Ray went to renew, he found out his credential had lapsed and the state wouldn't recognize it in time. So we made a plan. Ray would do the ceremony at the venue, the whole thing, vows and rings and everybody crying, and then Grant and I would go to the courthouse on Monday morning at 9 and sign the license with a judge. 2 minutes, a clerk, done. Half the couples we knew had done something similar. I remember Grant laughing about it and saying, "So technically we get a whole weekend where we're pretending." I remember laughing too. The second is the house. In March, Grant started bringing up putting his name on the deed. Not aggressively. He'd mention it while we were doing something else, folding laundry, driving back from his parents, and he'd say things like, "It just feels weird being a married man living in a house I don't own," or God forbid something happens to you, do you know what a nightmare that becomes for me? I said we'd do it after the wedding. He said that was fine. He said it 4 separate times, always in that same easy voice. And every single time my stomach did a small, unpleasant thing that I did not examine. The third is Sloan Kessler. Sloan worked with Grant. She was a clinical specialist at the same company. She was 33. She had the kind of hair that looked professionally handled at 8 in the morning on a Sunday, and she was engaged to a man named Marcus, who did something with commercial insurance and laughed too loud at his own setups. I met the two of them maybe 6 times. Sloan was warm with me. That's what I couldn't get past later. She wasn't cold. She wasn't dismissive. She didn't do any of the things the other woman is supposed to do in these stories. She asked about the venue. She sent me a link to a florist she liked. At my bridal shower, she gave me a set of copper measuring cups and hugged me and said, "He is so lucky, and he knows it." She was at my engagement party in a green dress. In the rough cut, you can see her at the edge of frame at 38:12, checking her phone and then leaving the ballroom. 22 seconds later, Grant sets his glass down on the bar and follows her out. I have never in my life watched 22 seconds so many times. The crack, the actual first crack, came in January, and it was so small, I'm embarrassed to say it out loud. We were at a Mexican place on High Street with his work friends, and somebody asked how we met, and Grant told the fundraiser story. Except, in his version, he came to the fundraiser because a colleague dragged him. And when he said a colleague, he didn't look at Sloan. He specifically did not look at Sloan in a room where he had looked at every other person while he was talking. It was a quarter of a second. I felt it in my ribs like a stare that isn't there. And then the food came, and I decided I was being insane, because that is what you do at 28 when you have a wedding deposit down and a dress in your closet and a mother who has already told 40 people the date. After that, I started noticing things I would then argue myself out of. He'd started taking his phone into the bathroom, which he'd never done, and when I made a joke about it, he said, "Do you want to read my texts, Nora? Genuinely, here." And he held it out, and I said, "No, of course not." And I felt like garbage for an hour. That's a trick, by the way. I know that now. Nobody hands you the phone unless the phone is clean. The stuff you want is never on the phone they hand you. There were work trips that got longer by a day. There was a stretch in February where he was affectionate in a way that felt like a performance for an audience that wasn't me. Big gestures, flowers on a Wednesday, and then 3 days of him being somewhere behind his own eyes. There was one night I woke up at 2 and he was sitting on the edge of the bed in the dark, not on his phone, not doing anything, just sitting. And when I asked if he was okay, he said, "I hate my job," and lay back down. I held on to that for months. I thought I had an unhappy man on my hands. It turned out I had a man doing math, and then April, and the engagement party, and 11 days later, the email. The videographer was a kid named Theo Barrow, 24, worked out of his parents' basement in Dublin, cheapest quote I got by $900, and he showed up to the consultation with a binder, an actual binder. He was so earnest it was almost painful. He'd done the engagement party as a package add-on, and he'd promised a rough cut in 2 weeks, and he delivered it in 11 days with an email that said, "Hey Nora, full raw plus a rough assembly." I left the raw in there because sometimes people want the real stuff. Ignore the boring parts, LOL. Let me know changes. I opened it on a Tuesday night. Grant was in Cincinnati for a regional thing until Thursday. I made a bowl of cereal for dinner because I was 31 days out from the wedding and living on cereal and spreadsheets, and I put my laptop on the counter and pressed play mostly to see my dress from the back. The rough assembly was 7 minutes, and it was lovely. My mother crying. My sister's twins running across the ballroom carpet. Grant with his hand on my lower back doing the thing where he tucked my hair behind my ear. Then the file after it was the raw. 51 minutes of unedited footage with the audio from the lav mics Theo had clipped on both of us at the start of the night because, as he explained later, he liked capturing real ambient conversation, not just the speeches. At 38:12, Sloan leaves. At 38:34, Grant follows. At 39:05, the camera swings back to the room and it stays there. It films my Aunt Marcia. It films the dessert table. It films a man I still cannot identify eating an entire plate of shrimp standing up. And the whole time, in the audio, is Grant's microphone, 3 floors of concrete away, still transmitting. The first 2 minutes are footsteps and a car alarm chirping and Sloan saying something I couldn't make out. Then she says clearly, "You need to stop looking at me like that in front of your mother. She's not stupid." And Grant laughs, and it's his real laugh, the low one, and he says, "My mother's known for a year." I want to describe what happened in my body, but the truth is nothing happened. I got very calm. I got so calm it frightened me later. I put down the cereal spoon and I turned the volume up and I pulled a receipt out of my bag and started writing timestamps on the back of it And I want you to understand that I had no plan at that moment. None. I just knew with total clarity that this was the only version of this recording that would ever exist. And I was not going to be a woman who could later be told she misheard. At 41:16, Sloan says, I can't keep doing this if you're actually going to marry her. And there's a pause, and Grant says, relax. 12 months, tops. Then half the house is mine and I'm gone. At 41:40, Sloan says, that's not how it works, Grant. And he says, it's exactly how it works if my name's on the deed. Ohio's not a nightmare state for this. I talked to a guy. He says, I talked to a guy. He says it the way you'd say you got a quote on gutters. At 42:55, she asks him why he can't just leave now. Why put everyone through it? And he says the thing that I think about more than any other sentence in the recording. He says, because right now, I'm the guy who moved in with a girl whose dad died, and now I'm the guy who left her. In a year, I'm just divorced. Everybody's divorced. Everybody's divorced. 206 people were coming. My mother had bought a dress in a color she'd never worn in her life. My father's insurance money was in the venue deposit, the catering, the tent for the patio in case it rained. At 44:20, somebody else comes into the garage and the two of them stop talking, and the audio goes to nothing but the hum of an elevator, and then footsteps, and then Grant's voice at normal volume back in the ballroom saying, there she is to me. I heard myself on the tape say, where'd you go? And I heard him say, Steve cornered me about the golf thing. I need a drink. I sat in my kitchen at 10:11 at night, listening to myself being lied to in surround sound, and I laughed. That's the honest reaction. I laughed out loud in an empty house. Then I got up and I copied that file to 3 different places, and I emailed a copy to myself with no subject line, and then I sat back down and watched it again. The next morning, I got up at 6, made coffee, put on scrubs, and went to work. And I checked in a golden retriever named Biscuit who had eaten a sock. I want to say that because people always assume that the moment you find out, your life stops. It doesn't. Biscuit still ate the sock. My coworker still needed me to fix the printer. The world is extremely rude about continuing. At lunch, I called Jazz. Jasmine Ruiz has been my best friend since we were 15, and she is the single most useful person to have in a crisis because she does not cry with you, she takes notes. I told her in one long, unbroken sentence in the parking lot behind the clinic, and when I finished, there was a silence, and then she said, okay, do not call him. Do not text him. Do not do that thing you do where you get quiet and he asks what's wrong and you tell him. That's the thing about a confidant who's known you since high school. She knows your exact failure mode. She came over that night with a bag of tacos and a legal pad, and we sat on my living room floor with a laptop between us, and she made me play the whole 44 minutes with the lights on. When it got to everybody's divorced, she put her taco down and said quietly, oh, he's not even in love with her. And I said, what do you mean? And she said, listen to him. He's not in love with Sloan either. She's just the person he talks to about it. That man is in love with the exit. That reframed everything for me. I had spent one night thinking of myself as a woman who'd been cheated on. Jazz handed me the actual problem, which was that I was a woman who was 30 days out from signing a legal document with somebody who had already spoken out loud on tape about what he intended to take. So we made a list. Jazz wrote it. It said, 1. What does he actually know about the money? 2. What has he already signed or set up? 3. Who else knew? 4. What do I want the ending to look like? Number 4 sat there staring at me for 3 days. Here's what I found over the following 2 weeks. And I'll tell you now that I did not hack anything. I did not read his email. I didn't need to, because the whole thing was sitting in plain sight in my own house, waiting for somebody to be paying attention. There was a folder on the kitchen desk labeled wedding/admin in Grant's handwriting. He'd been so good about the paperwork. That had been one of my favorite things about him during the engagement, that he handled the boring stuff, the license appointment, the name change packet, the insurance updates, the venue's final invoice. He'd put together a stack for me twice already with little sticky arrows on them that said, sign here. And I'd sign them at the counter with a cup of tea in my other hand without reading a single line, because he was going to be my husband. I went through that folder on a Sunday while he was at his parents'. Most of it was exactly what it said. Marriage license appointment, confirmation for Monday the 11th at 9 a.m., Franklin County. A change of name checklist. A form for the insurance beneficiary on his 401k, which he had actually filled out correctly with my name on it, which confused me for a full minute until I realized that a man planning a 12-month marriage does not care at all what happens to his 401k because he does not plan to die, he plans to leave. And underneath all of it, in a plastic sleeve, was a quitclaim deed. I did not know what a quitclaim deed was. I'm going to assume some of you don't either. It's a one-page document that transfers an interest in a property. It had my name on it as grantor. It had my name and his name together as grantees, joint with rights of survivorship. The property description was my address, my dad's address. There was a yellow sticky arrow on the signature line, and clipped behind it was a printout of an appointment confirmation with a mobile notary for Monday the 11th at 9:40 a.m., 40 minutes after the license signing, at a UPS store 4 blocks from the courthouse. He wasn't going to ask me. He was going to hand it to me in a stack on the happiest Monday morning of my life, in a lobby with a pen, 30 seconds after a judge told us we were married, and I would have signed it. That's what makes me the sickest still. Not that he tried it, that it would have worked. I would have signed it and then gone to brunch. I sat on my kitchen floor with my back against the dishwasher for I don't know how long, and that was my low point if you want the honest one. Not the recording, the floor, with that piece of paper. Because the recording made me angry, and the paper made me feel stupid. And stupid is so much heavier than angry. I called Jazz and told her I was going to cancel everything and get him out of my house that night and be done. And she said, "Okay, we can do that, but answer me one question first, and then whatever you decide, I'm in the car in 20 minutes. And I said, "What?" And she said, "If you throw him out on a Sunday with no witnesses, what does he tell everyone on Monday?" We both knew the answer. I'd seen him do it with smaller things a dozen times. He would be devastated. He would be gracious about it. He would tell my mother he was worried about me, that I'd been under so much stress with the wedding, that I'd been struggling since my dad. He would tell his family I got cold feet, and he'd say it with a sad little smile that made everyone want to bring him a casserole. Half of my own family would end up feeling sorry for him. And Sloan would drive to my house in 8 days to help him move his things out, in her green dress energy, being warm about it. I said, "I want people to hear it." Jazz said, "Then don't cancel anything." I took photographs of the deed on my phone, every corner, the notary confirmation, the whole plastic sleeve, and I put all of it back exactly the way it had been, with the sticky arrow at the same angle, and I wiped the counter, and I made dinner. He came home at 7:20 with a container of his mom's stuffed peppers and said the traffic on 315 was insane, and he kissed the top of my head, and I said, "How's Diane?" And he said, "Fine. She keeps asking if you've picked a hairstyle." That was the closest I came to giving myself away. I laughed, and it came out wrong, too loud and too high, and he looked up from the container. He looked at me for about a second and a half, and I said, "Sorry, I've had 4 hours of sleep, and I'm going to lose my mind if one more person asks me about my hair." And his face relaxed, and he said, "Tell her it's a French twist, and she'll leave you alone for a week." I went to the bathroom and ran the tap and stood there with my hands on the sink and told myself, 29 days. 29 days is a very long time to be an actress in your own house. People ask me how I did it, and the answer is unglamorous. I got obsessively busy. I said yes to every wedding errand. I answered the seating chart emails at 11 at night. I let my mother talk to me about napkin folds for 40 minutes. And I said, in the right places, while I sat there thinking about a UPS store on Mound Street. Being busy is a wonderful place to hide a feeling. Ask any woman. But I also used those weeks because Jazz's list still had questions on it. Number 3 was who else knew? And I got that one answered by accident at Diane's Sunday brunch 2 weeks out. Grant's mother is one of those women who runs a house like a small hotel and has a personal rule about not sitting down. I was helping her carry plates in from the patio, and she said, without any particular weight, I told him a year ago that if he wasn't sure, he needed to say so before you paid for anything. I kept walking. I put the plates in the sink, and I said, as lightly as I could, "What made you think he wasn't sure?" And Diane wiped her hands on a towel and said, "Oh, honey, he gets like that. He got like that with Aaron, too." And then she said, "But he's settled now." And she squeezed my arm, and she went out for the rest of the glasses. Aaron. I had never heard the name Aaron in my life. I found her in 9 minutes that night. Aaron Delacroix, 34, lived in Cleveland now, had been with Grant for 3 years before me, and had a public photo from 6 years ago of the two of them in front of a duplex with a sold sign. I did not contact her. I thought about it for a week. I typed a message 4 separate times and deleted it because I could not think of a single version of that conversation that didn't end with somebody warning him. But I wrote her name on Jazz's legal pad, and I want to tell you what it did to me to sit there in my own bedroom while my fiancé slept 8 feet away and understand that his own mother's read on our engagement was, "He gets like that." The Sloan question answered itself the following Thursday, and it was almost funny. Grant left his laptop open on the kitchen table and went out to move his car, and a message came up on the screen. I want to be precise because this matters to me. I didn't open anything. I didn't click. It was a preview banner on a screen in my kitchen that said Sloan and then Marcus is asking why I'm going to the wedding alone. 2 more days of this. 2 more days. Not 2 more days until the wedding, which was 8 days away. 2 more days until something else. I never found out what. I have decided I don't need to. And then, 4 days out, I asked Theo Barrow to meet me for coffee. That is the conversation I am most proud of, and it was also the most terrifying. Because up until that point, everything I'd done could be undone. This was the first move that involved another human being. I brought my laptop. I made him watch the section from 3812 with headphones on in a Starbucks while I watched his face. He got about 90 seconds in and he went gray. He took the headphones off and he said, "Oh my God, Nora, oh my God, that's my mic. That's my fault. I clipped it on him at the start of the reception and I stopped him and said, Theo, it's not your fault. It's the single best thing anybody has ever done for me." He sat there for a second and then he said, "Do you want me to delete it?" And I said, "No, I want you to cut it." I explained what I wanted. 90 seconds. Just the audio over black with the timestamp and the date in the corner. And one shot at the end of the two of them coming back into that ballroom separately. 40 seconds apart, because a voice is deniable and a room is not. I wanted it cued as the first thing on the reception screen in the slot where our welcome video was supposed to play. And I wanted our welcome video kept in the second slot in case I lost my nerve. That kid did not ask me a single question about whether I was sure. He asked me 2 technical questions and 1 real one. The real one was, "Are you going to be safe? Like, will he?" And I said, "He's never once raised his voice at me. He doesn't need to. That's not how he does things." And Theo nodded and said, "Okay, I'll be at the back with a laptop. If you touch your necklace, I play it. If you don't touch your necklace, I play the nice one and nobody ever knows." We settled on a signal like we were in a heist movie in a Starbucks on a Wednesday, and then he cried a little bit and I bought him a scone. The rest of the week I want to describe honestly because if you have ever had to be pleasant to somebody while you were counting down, you already know it. And if you haven't, I hope you never do. My bachelorette was the Saturday before. 9 women in a rented house in Hocking Hills. There is a photo from that night of me on a couch in a sash somebody bought at Target, laughing so hard my eyes are shut. And it's a real laugh. I've looked at that photo a lot. It turns out you can be having the worst month of your life and still genuinely enjoy your cousin Maddie doing an impression of her own husband. Grief and rage don't take up your whole body. There's room left over. That's the part nobody warns you about. Jazz was the only one who knew. At 2 in the morning on the back deck, she handed me a beer and said, "You know you can still just not." And I said, "I know." And she said, "You know if you do this, some of these women will think you're the crazy one." And I said, "I know that too." And she was quiet for a second, and then she said, "For the record, I've already told the caterer I'm allergic to shellfish, so I get the special plate, and I fully intend to eat it while your ex-fiancé's life falls apart." That's the dark humor I needed. I laughed until I had to sit down on the deck steps. Thursday, the rehearsal. Uncle Ray walked us through the timing and made a joke about being the world's most decorative officiant, and everyone laughed and Grant put his arm around my waist and said to the room, "Monday morning, 9 a.m. That's when it's real." And 200% of me wanted to say it out loud right there, in a church basement, in front of 11 people. I didn't. Waiting cost me something. I want to be clear about that because in these stories, the woman always looks so composed. I lost 9 pounds in 5 weeks. I threw up twice. I slept maybe 3 hours a night, and I lay next to him and listened to him breathe and had entire conversations with him in my head. Friday night, the night before the wedding, I stayed at my mother's house, which is traditional, and which I had never been so grateful for in my life. She came into my old bedroom at 11 and sat on the edge of the bed and said, "You seem far away." And I said, "I'm just tired, Mom." And she said, "Your dad would have loved this whole circus." And she went to bed, and I lay there in a room with a poster of a horse on the wall from when I was 12, and I made my final decision at about 2 in the morning. I decided I would let him have the ceremony. The wedding was on a Saturday in June at a restored barn venue in Delaware County, with a long gravel drive and string lights over a patio and a hayfield behind it that turned gold at about 7 in the evening. I had picked it because my dad would have loved the beams. He would have stood there with his hands in his pockets, looking up at the roof structure and said something about post and beam joinery that nobody asked for. I got ready upstairs with 6 women and a hairstylist named Bev, who said, gorgeous every 90 seconds like a metronome. My mother cried at the dress. Beth's twins were in the corner of the room fighting over an iPad. Somebody's phone was playing a playlist, and my Aunt Marcia kept refilling glasses with Prosecco out of a bottle she had brought herself in a tote bag, which is the most Marcia thing that has ever happened. I wore my grandmother's earrings, and I wore a necklace, a thin gold chain with a small flat disc that Grant had given me the previous Christmas. Everybody in that room thought I was nervous. I was so calm, it was almost pleasant. I remember eating half a bagel at 11 in the morning and thinking, this is the last normal food of my old life. And then thinking, that's very dramatic for a bagel. The ceremony was at 4. I walked down that aisle on my mother's arm because my dad wasn't there to do it, past 206 people in folding wooden chairs, and I looked at every single face. I saw my boss from the clinic. I saw Jazz in the third row not smiling, holding her clutch with both hands like a woman about to watch a building come down. I saw Diane in dove gray, dabbing under her eye. I saw Sloane Kessler on the groom's side, 7 rows back next to Marcus in a navy dress, and when I looked at her, she smiled at me, and I smiled back, and something in my chest went perfectly still. And I saw Grant at the front, and he had tears in his eyes, real ones. That is the detail I still can't file anywhere. He was crying. He was standing there in a charcoal suit with his hands folded and his eyes wet, looking at me the way you'd want somebody to look at you, and he had a notary appointment in his calendar for Monday at 9:40. Uncle Ray did the whole thing, and he was lovely. And he told the story of the chairs at the fundraiser, and everybody laughed. Grant said his vows, and they were good. They were specific. He mentioned the granola bars. 200 people went aw in one breath, and I stood there holding his hands and thinking, you rehearsed that, and then, no, that's the worst part. You didn't have to. I said mine. I had rewritten them 3 weeks earlier. I said, I promise to tell you the truth, even when it cost me something, especially when it cost me something. Half the room thought it was a lovely line. Jazz put her hand over her mouth. We kissed. Everybody stood up. The string quartet played us out, and we walked into that gold light, and people threw dried lavender. And for about 11 minutes, I stood in a hayfield having my picture taken with a man I no longer knew. And honestly, the photos are gorgeous. I have them. I look radiant. I was radiant. I was about 80 minutes out. Cocktail hour was on the patio. I drank exactly 1 glass of champagne and put it down. I did my rounds. I hugged people. My uncle told me about his knee. A woman from Grant's office, whose name I never learned, told me she'd never seen him like this. I said, neither have I. At 6:20, they moved everybody inside for the reception, into the barn with the long tables and the lights. And there was that lull where everyone finds their seats and the room gets loud. Theo was at the back left on a stool, laptop on a cocktail table, cables running to the projector. He didn't look at me. That kid had nerves of steel. The screen was down behind the head table. The plan was everyone's seats, salads out, then the welcome video, then the toasts, then dinner. The DJ, a man named Rick with a headset, was going to say a few words to kick it off. Rick got on the mic and said, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome for the first time Mr. and Mrs. Grant Merrick. And the room stood up and roared, and we walked in through the double doors with his hand on the small of my back. We sat. The salads came out. I looked at the room for a second, at all those faces. My mother 8 feet away with her hand pressed to her chest. And I thought about how much this cost. Not the money, although the money was real, and it was my father's. And I want to say the number out loud because women are always taught to be quiet about it. $41,000. And of that, Grant's family had contributed 6. Rick said, before we get to the toasts, the couple has put together a little something for you. And Grant leaned over to me smiling and said, this is the part where my mother cries again. I stood up. I said, actually, Rick, can I have that for 1 second? There was a laugh in the room. A bride grabbing the mic before the toast is a fun bride. Somebody whooped. Rick handed it over and gave me a thumbs up. Grant sat back in his chair with his arm across the back of mine and looked up at me with an expression of total, relaxed, amused ownership. And I reached up and I touched my necklace. I said, thank you all so much for being here. A lot of you drove a long way. My voice was completely steady, which surprised me. Before anybody says anything nice about us, I want you all to hear something first. And the room went black on the screen behind me. There was no music. There was no title card. There was a timestamp in the corner in white text that said April 26th, 10:41 p.m., and there was a car alarm chirping, and then there was Sloane Kessler's voice at full volume through a sound system built for a 200-person barn saying, you need to stop looking at me like that in front of your mother. She's not stupid. And Grant's voice, that low, real laugh saying, my mother's known for a year. I have never heard a room do what that room did. It wasn't a gasp. It was a kind of collapsing sound, chairs and breath, and one fork hitting a plate, and then absolute silence because the audio kept going. I can't keep doing this if you're actually going to marry her. Relax. 12 months tops. Then half the house is mine and I'm gone. I did not look at the screen. I stood at the head table facing 206 people and I watched them hear it. I watched my mother's face. I watched Beth stand up halfway out of her chair. I watched Diane Merrick put both hands flat on the table in front of her and look down at them and not look up. Not once, which told me everything. Grant moved at half the house. He came up out of that chair and reached for my arm, and I stepped back and said into the microphone, "Don't touch me." And he stopped because there were 200 people watching. And that's the thing about a man who does everything for the audience. The audience works both ways. Sloane's voice. That's not how it works, Grant. His voice. It's exactly how it works if my name's on the deed. Ohio's not a nightmare state for this. I talked to a guy. Somewhere 7 rows of tables back, Marcus said, out loud, "Sloane?" Not angry, just confused, in the way that is so much worse. And people turned. Everybody turned. I saw her stand up and put her napkin on the table with her hands shaking and start walking toward the doors. And a woman at her table said, "Are you kidding me?" And Sloane kept walking. And then the last part, over the sound of her heels on that barn floor, because right now, I'm the guy who moved in with a girl whose dad died, and now I'm the guy who left her. In a year, I'm just divorced. Everybody's divorced. Then Black. And then Theo's final shot. The ballroom at the engagement party, time-stamped. Grant coming through the doors, straightening his jacket. 40 seconds of nothing. Then Sloane through the same doors, tucking her hair behind her ear. Then the screen went white and the lights came up. Grant said, "Nora." He said it quietly close to me, off mic, and he said, "That is not what that is." And I lifted the microphone and I said so that everyone could hear it, "Say it louder, honey. Tell all of them what it is." He didn't say anything. 206 people watched a very confident man have nothing at all to say for about 4 seconds, which is a very long time. So I said the rest of it. I'd written it on a piece of paper in my grandmother's earrings box that morning, but I didn't need it. I said, on Monday morning at 9 o'clock, Grant and I were scheduled to sign our marriage license at the Franklin County Courthouse because Ray's ordination lapsed, which means that as of right now, legally, I am not married to this man. Nothing you watched today was binding. Thank you, Ray. There was a noise from the room that was almost a laugh. Ray, God bless him, raised his hand. I said, at 9:40 on Monday, 4 blocks away, he had a notary appointment I did not know about. In his folder in our kitchen, there is a deed with my house on it and my name on it, and a little yellow sticker on the line where I was supposed to sign 30 minutes after becoming his wife. That house was my father's. My father died in the front room of that house. I said, I found all of this 5 weeks ago, and I let today happen anyway. And I know some of you are going to think that's cruel, and I've made my peace with that. I let it happen because if I had called it off in April, he would have spent this whole summer telling every one of you that I fell apart, that I got scared. That grief made me difficult. I looked right at Diane when I said it, and most of you would have believed him because he's good. He is really, really good. I said, so this is the only version of this that I get to tell in my own voice. Everything's paid for. The bar is open. The chicken is very good. Please stay, eat, dance. My mother spent 4 months on the flowers. And I put the microphone down on the table next to the cake knife. And I picked up my dress in both hands. And I walked out of that barn between the tables while 200 people stood up. Jazz met me at the doors with my flats and my bag and the keys already in her hand. And behind us, I swear to you, I heard my Aunt Marcia say, well, I'm eating. Here's what happened after because everyone always wants the after. I slept at Jazz's that night in a t-shirt with a picture of a cat on it. And I slept 9 hours, which I hadn't done since April. My phone had 141 messages on it by morning. I didn't read them for 2 days. Grant did not come to the house. His brother did on Sunday afternoon with 2 other men in a truck, and I was not there because Beth and my brother-in-law had spent Saturday night putting everything of his on the enclosed porch in labeled boxes while the reception was still going on. That was Beth's idea. Nobody asked me. I got a photo at 11 p.m. of 11 boxes stacked by the door with a note taped to the top one that said, everything's here, check the list, do not knock. My sister and I did not get along for most of our 20s. We get along now. The deed and the notary appointment went to a lawyer on Tuesday. I want to be careful about this part because I'm not one, and every state is different. And the honest answer is that nothing dramatic happened legally. He never actually submitted anything. He never forged anything. A document sitting in a folder with a sticky arrow on it is, as my attorney put it, extremely bad character evidence and not much else. What it did do was make the rest of it simple. He had no claim on the house. We were never legally married. He had no standing to ask for anything, and when he did ask, through his brother for half of the wedding gift money, my attorney sent one letter, and we never heard about it again. What actually cost him wasn't legal. It was social, and it was total, and it was fast. 206 people were in that room. About 40 of them were his colleagues because Grant liked mixing work and life, and he'd invited half the regional team, including his own director. I did not send that video to anyone. I want to say that clearly because people assume I did. I never posted it, never emailed it, never gave it to a single person outside that room. I didn't have to. Roughly 90 phones were in that barn, and by Sunday night, it existed in 100 group chats, and there was nothing I could have done about that even if I'd wanted to, and I did not want to. He was moved off his territory within a month. Not fired, as far as I know. Moved. He and Sloan could not work the same accounts anymore, and I heard from someone that HR had a very long and unpleasant time with both of them, because it turned out theirs was not the only relationship on that team that people had suspicions about, and the whole thing turned into an audit of an entire regional office. That is the single funniest consequence of my wedding, and I had absolutely nothing to do with it. Marcus left Sloan. That happened in the parking lot, apparently, before the cake was cut. I have complicated feelings about Sloan that I've stopped trying to organize. She sent me a long message in August. I read the first 2 lines, which were about how she'd wanted to tell me 100 times, and I deleted it without reading the rest because I wanted to tell you is a sentence about her, and I was finally done letting the 2 of them be the main characters in my life. Diane called me 6 times in the first week. I answered on the 6th. She cried. She said she never knew about any deed, and I believe her, and I told her that. Then she said, "But you didn't have to do it like that, Nora." In front of everybody. "He's my son." And I said, "He told her you'd known for a year." And she was quiet for a long time, and then she said, "I have to go." That was 14 months ago. We haven't spoken since. I sent back the christening gown she'd given me for a baby that doesn't exist. And that was the last thing between us. My mother had a harder time than I expected. Not with me, with herself. She kept saying I introduced him to everyone at church. It took her until about October to stop apologizing to me for a thing she didn't do. What helped weirdly was the money. I called the venue on Monday, and the caterer, and the florist, and I told the truth to all of them, and every single one of them did something for me. The venue refunded the second half of the bar. The photographer who had shot the whole thing, including my face during the video, sent me the full gallery for free with a note that said, "There's a shot of you at 6:44 that I hope you look at when you're ready." The florist sent flowers to my mother. People are so much better than you expect them to be in the exact moment you assume they'll be worst. I paid Theo Barrow triple, and I wrote him a review that took me an hour to write, and last winter he shot 2 weddings for people who found him because of me, which I think about with enormous satisfaction. That's the practical part. Here's the part that took longer. For about 3 months, I was not okay, in a way that didn't look like anything from the outside. I went to work. I paid my bills. I was fine at dinner. And then I'd be standing in the cereal aisle at 9 at night, unable to move, because he used to buy the store brand and I couldn't remember if I liked the store brand or if I'd just adapted. That is what nobody tells you about a relationship like that ending. It's not that you miss him. It's that you have to go excavate all these small pieces of yourself that you slowly handed over without noticing and figure out which ones you actually want back. I found a therapist in September. I started running badly. I painted the front room in a color he had vetoed, a deep green, and it looks incredible, and it was the cheapest joy of my entire year. In February, I took the ring to a jeweler and had the stone reset into a pendant for Beth because she was the one who packed the boxes. I'm 29 now. It's been a little over a year. I still live on Fairbank Street in my dad's house with my name and only my name on that deed. And last spring, I finally fixed the driveway. I'm seeing someone very slowly, a man who teaches high school chemistry and who has, so far, done nothing more suspicious than being genuinely bad at texting. It's early. I'm not making any announcements. I've learned that not everything has to be a story. And here's what I actually want to say to you, whoever you are, listening to this in your car or folding laundry. I knew in January, not the details, not the deed, not the garage, not Aaron in Cleveland, but I knew in January in a Mexican restaurant when he said, "a colleague," and didn't look at her. And something in my body sat up and said, "That's wrong." And I spent 5 months teaching myself not to believe it, because believing it was going to be expensive and humiliating, and my mother had already bought a dress. That's the trap. It's never really about the other woman. It's about how much you've already spent and how many people are already watching. and how much easier it is to call yourself paranoid than to call somebody else a liar. So, if there's a thing in your stomach right now that you keep talking yourself out of, that's the whole message. You are not crazy, and you are not difficult, and you are not being dramatic. You noticed something, that's all. Noticing is not an accusation, it's just information, and you're allowed to go find out if it's true. The worst thing that can happen isn't finding out you were right. The worst thing that can happen is finding out you were right on a Monday morning in a lobby with a pen in your hand, 30 seconds too late.